Jaqueline Miller loved exploring. She wasn't afraid of dark corners or spooky places. In fact, she actually sought them out. Her favorite spot was a little-known place just outside of town called the Lost Grotto. It wasn't on any map, just a secret cove hidden by weeping willow trees and jagged rocks. Locals whispered stories about it, saying the cave was a place where the world of the living and the world of spirits were very, very close. They said strange things happened there, especially after sunset, but Jaqueline didn't believe in ghost stories. To her, the Lost Grotto was just a cool, damp cave with pretty glowing moss on the walls. It was her secret hideout, her personal sanctuary, or so she thought. Everything changed one rainy afternoon. Jaqueline was inside the grotto, listening to the gentle drip, drip, drip of water from the stalactites. Suddenly, a cold wind snaked through the cave, extinguishing her lantern. It wasn't a normal wind, it felt personal. It felt like an icy breath on the back of her neck. Then she heard it, a whisper. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but it grew louder, slithering around her in the darkness. The whisper wasn't in English or any language she knew. It was a chilling, ancient sound that made the hair on her arm stand straight up. She fumbled for her matches, her hands trembling, and finally relit her lantern, but she was alone. The whispering stopped. After that day, Jaqueline couldn't stay away. It was as if the grotto was calling to her, pulling her back with an invisible string. She started spending more and more time there, fascinated by the strange whispers. They became a regular occurrence, sometimes sounding like a sad song, other times like an angry hiss. She started hearing other things too, the sound of footsteps echoing in the passages behind her, even when she knew she was alone. She would see fleeting shadows dancing on the cave walls, shadows that didn't belong to her or the rocks. She told herself it was just her imagination, the strange acoustics of the cave playing tricks on her ears and eyes. But deep down, a cold knot of fear was beginning to form in her stomach. Her friends, Liam and Chloe, started to notice the changes in Jaqueline. Her eyes had dark circles under them, and she was always tired and jumpy. She stopped hanging out with them at the mall or going to the movies. Whenever they asked where she'd been, she would just mumble, "The grotto." She tried to explain the whispers and the shadows, but her words came out jumbled and strange. Liam and Chloe would exchange worried glances. The fun-loving, fearless Jaqueline they knew was disappearing, replaced by this haunted, distant person. They knew the stories about the Lost Grotto. They had always dismissed them as silly campfire tales. But now, looking at their friend, they weren't so sure. They were scared. Scared for Jaqueline. One evening, Liam and Chloe decided they had to see for themselves. They followed Jaqueline to the Lost Grotto, keeping a safe distance. They watched as she disappeared into the dark mouth of the cave without even a flashlight. They waited, their hearts pounding in their chests. After a few minutes, they crept closer to the entrance. That's when they heard it. The whispering. It wasn't just in their imagination. It was real, a cold, menacing sound that seemed to come from the very rocks themselves. Then a scream echoed from within the cave. It was Jaqueline. Without a second thought, they rushed inside, their phone flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. They found Jaqueline huddled in the main chamber, her face pale and streaked with tears. She was pointing a shaking finger at a dark corner of the cave. "It was here," she sobbed. "It touched me." She described a tall, shadowy figure that had emerged from the wall, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. It had no face, only two glowing red dots for eyes. It had reached out with a long, wispy arm, its touch feeling like 1,000 icy needles on her skin. Liam shone his light into the corner, but there was nothing there, just damp rock and dripping water. But the air was freezing cold, and the feeling of being watched was so strong it was almost suffocating. That night, Jaqueline didn't go home. She couldn't. She said she could still feel the cold touch on her arm, and the whispers were no longer just in the grotto. She could hear them in her own head. They swirled around in her thoughts, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. She stayed at Chloe's house, but none of them got any sleep. Strange things started happening there too. Lights flickered on and off, doors creaked open and slammed shut on their own. In the middle of the night, a low, guttural growl came from Jaqueline's room. When Liam and Chloe rushed in, they found her sitting straight up in bed, her eyes wide open but completely blank, whispering in that same ancient language from the cave. It was then that they knew this was something they couldn't handle on their own. This wasn't a prank or a bad dream. Something from the Lost Grotto had attached itself to Jaqueline. It was feeding on her fear, growing stronger every hour. Liam remembered his grandmother telling him stories about a woman in the next town, a Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who dealt with unusual problems. She was an expert in folklore and what she called spiritual intrusions. It was a long shot, a crazy idea, but it was the only one they had. They had to get help. They had to save their friend before the shadow from the grotto consumed her completely. Mrs. Eleanor Vance was not what they expected. She was a small, elderly woman with kind eyes and a house that smelled of dried herbs and old books. She'd listened patiently as Liam and Chloe explained everything, from the first whispers to the terrifying events at Chloe's house. She nodded slowly, her expression serious. "The Lost Grotto has a long memory," she said in a calm, steady voice. "It's a place where the veil is thin. It sounds like your friend has picked up a classic echo, a spiritual parasite that has latched onto her energy." She explained that it wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but a lingering, angry memory trapped in the stone, and it now thought Jaqueline was part of its world. She agreed to help, but she made it clear that this was not a simple task. "We cannot fight it with force," she explained. "These things feed on negative emotions, fear, anger, despair. We must not show fear. We must create a space of peace and light and persuade the echo to let go." She gave them a list of items to gather: bundles of sage, pure sea salt, white candles, and a small silver bell. The ritual, she said, had to take place in the grotto itself. They had to confront the entity in its own territory. The thought of going back into that dark, whispering cave made Liam and Chloe's blood run cold. But one look at Jaqueline, who sat silently in the corner, staring at nothing, gave them the courage they needed. The preparations took the entire next day. Mrs. Vance showed them how to arrange the candles in a protective circle and how to create a line of salt at the cave's entrance to block the entity from escaping or drawing more power from the outside. She taught them a simple chant, a few words in an old language that meant, "Peace, be still, you're free." She told them their role was to hold the light and focus on positive, happy memories of Jaqueline, creating a shield of warmth that the cold entity could not penetrate. Their belief and their friendship would be their most powerful weapons against the darkness that had taken hold of their friend. As dusk fell on the day of the planned exorcism, a strange, unnatural storm began to brew. The sky turned a sickly shade of purple and green, and the wind howled through the trees, sounding like a mournful cry. It was as if the entity knew what they were planning and was fighting back, trying to scare them away. They led a weak and compliant Jaqueline toward the grotto's entrance, the wind tearing at their clothes. The air grew colder with every step. The whispers started before they even reached the cave, louder and more menacing than ever, swirling around them, promising fear and despair. Holding their resolve, with Mrs. Vance leading the way, they stepped across the threshold into the waiting darkness. Inside the grotto, the air was thick and heavy, and the silence was even more terrifying than the whispers. They quickly set up the circle of white candles, their small flames pushing back the oppressive gloom. Mrs. Vance placed Jaqueline in the center of the circle and then drew a line of salt around her. As soon as the salt was laid, the whispers erupted into a furious roar. The candle flames danced wildly, threatening to go out, and a bone-chilling cold swept through the chamber. Shadows writhed on the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes. A deep, guttural voice coming from Jaqueline's own mouth, but sounding ancient and full of rage, screamed, "Get out! This place is mine! She is mine!" Mrs. Vance remained calm. She lit the bundle of sage, its thick, aromatic smoke filling the air. She began to chant in a low, firm voice, her words a beacon of calm in the chaos. She instructed Liam and Chloe to do the same, to focus on their love for their friend. They closed their eyes and pictured Jaqueline as she used to be, laughing, running, full of life. The silver bell in Mrs. Vance's hand began to ring, its clear, pure tone cutting through the demonic growls. With each ring of the bell and each word of the chant, the shadows seemed to shrink back, and the furious roaring lessened to a pained hiss. The fight was far from over, but a tiny flicker of hope was ignited in the darkness. The entity fought back with all its power. It made the cave floor tremble and sent a shower of pebbles down from the ceiling. It filled their minds with images of their greatest fears. But Liam, Chloe and Mrs. Vance held strong, their voices united in the simple chant. Mrs. Vance stepped forward and gently placed her hand on Jaqueline's forehead. "You do not belong here," she said, her voice full of authority and compassion. "This child is not yours to keep. Go back to the stone, go back to the silence, be at peace." A final ear-splitting shriek erupted from Jaqueline, a sound of pure agony and release. The shadowy form they had seen before ripped itself out of her and slammed against the far wall of the cave, dissolving into nothingness. Then silence. The wind died down. The candles burned steadily. Jaqueline slumped forward, unconscious. The air in the grotto felt different, lighter, cleaner. The oppressive cold was gone, replaced by the natural coolness of the cave. Liam and Chloe rushed to their friend's side. After a moment, Jaqueline's eyes fluttered open. "Liam? Chloe?" she whispered, her voice weak but her own. "What happened?" A wave of immense relief washed over everyone. They helped Jaqueline out of the cave and into the clean night air, leaving the grotto to its silence. The ordeal was over, but the memory of the whispers and the shadows would stay with them forever. A chilling reminder of the day they stood against the darkness of the Lost Grotto.